I always like to start a presentation by reminding people what QS is and why we're here, because we spend a lot of time in conference rooms with representatives of universities, but that's not really the core mission of QS. The core mission of QS is to enable motivated people around the world to achieve their potential by fostering international mobility, educational achievement, and career development. What that fundamentally means is that we're really about the students, the prospective students, the young high potential people that we're all collectively going to help achieve their potential through educational achievements at your university, the careers that they go on to afterwards, and crucially and distinctively, I think, bringing an international element to that. And that's why these meetings come together, to draw educators and administrators from universities around the world and around the region to explore how they can more effectively internationalize. Our approach in the world rankings context was to say, well, what is a world-class university? Well, people were already measuring and evaluating research. That was clearly a crucial mechanism. We also wanted to try and talk to teaching critically and still distinctively to employability and to bring in that international dimension. Whether or not we do that successfully in our rankings is a matter of opinion and a matter of some debate, and perhaps we can explore some of that here today. Our main QS World University rankings have a long-established methodology that hasn't changed at a headline level since 2005. There have been some modifications to how the individual indicators are applied. We're not going to go into detail on them in this masterclass unless you ask questions that lead us down that path. This is going to be an interactive session. A key objective is to make sure that we adapt the content, that I adapt the content to the knowledge levels in the room and the questions that you have. So think about the mainline methodology, the subjects, how the different pieces fit together, and if you've got questions, we can explore different avenues in greater or lesser detail as the session goes on. The stability of our overall methodology is good. The relatively low dependence on data reported directly by institutions is good. It brings in a degree of confidence. The dependence that it has on reputation surveys is an area that is broadly criticized. We're not going to be afraid in this session today from saying, well, hang on, here's an area that we do come into some criticism for. We can explain and answer questions as to why we do it that way. But ultimately, we acknowledge that essentially all models are wrong, but some are useful. That applies to our own models as well. We think they are good. We think they are useful. We are working to make them better all of the time. But a ranking is not a perfect science. It's not the absolute word of God. It doesn't say necessarily that this university is better than this university, because it crunches everything together and essentially turns a university into a number. And we know, and you know, and we all know that universities are rather more complex entities than that, with all sorts of different dimensions, many of which are not measured at all in rankings, and many of which are not measured very well in rankings. So we've got an ongoing mission to improve that, but no illusions that it's ever going to be perfect. What that means, though, if all models are wrong, is that maybe in order to look at different dimensions of university performance, we need to develop more models, so that perhaps collectively a group of models can give a richer picture of different strengths and dimensions of institutional quality. Well, what are those categories that we might want to break down into? By region or geography, perhaps, maybe at some point in the future by specific country. By subject, obviously, subject rankings, the QS World University rankings by subject came out last week. They've been talked about all over the world. They're big on social media at the moment. One of the reasons why they're so successful is that very many stakeholders of universities care first about subject and then about other dimensions. Prospective students tend to have decided that they want to study economics or physics or mechanical engineering, and then they try to figure out where they should go to study that subject. Parents, similarly, for their children, how can I convince my child that they should really be a doctor even though they want to be an artist? They're thinking about subject before they're thinking about destination. By context, what's the reality in a specific city or a specific country or education system. By mission, let's break it out. Let's ideally at some point in the future look at teaching in more depth. Already we're looking at employability in more depth. Or by type of institution. Are younger institutions working on a different scorecard, if you like, than older institutions, specialist institutions versus comprehensive institutions, and so forth. So we drill down to some degree in each of these individual areas already. Regional rankings, we're running 5 different regional rankings. Subjects have been a real strategic focus for us. We're now doing, that's not updated as of last week. It's 48 specific subjects, 5 broad subject areas, a global MBA ranking, distance online MBA, executive MBA, and 3 business masters programs and counting. By context, we're looking at cities and systems. By mission, we're looking at employability. We're looking at innovation in pedagogy with a Reimagine Education Awards program rather than a ranking. And QS Stars, which looks at a variety of different missions of institutions in more depth. And by institutional type, in terms of providing classifications that can enable you to identify institutions that are more like yourselves and young institutions in the top 50, under 50 context. We acknowledge that a much larger number of universities than are in the top 500 in anybody's world university ranking are and should be recognized as being in the world's top 500 for something, for a specific subject, in the context of their own region, for teaching or employability or facilities or international student support. There are all sorts of dimensions that we might look at going forward. And we want to give larger and larger numbers of institutions a framework to independently promote their greatest strengths. At the last count, excluding specialist institutions in the subject rankings, our global and regional rankings were enfolding 1,769 different universities, and we have a strategic drive to build that out. One dimension I thought would be useful for this particular masterclass, because there have been some significant team changes at QS Intelligence Unit over the last 18 months, is to give you a sense of the people that are doing this. This is the rankings team. There are a variety of other analysts that get involved in crunching the numbers at times, but there are now 10 people focused specifically on gathering and crunching data for the rankings, and one or more of these names may be familiar to either you or people at your institution as being the people that are reaching out to try and get your institution to present data accurately and precisely. So let's talk about the masterclass. What is a masterclass? We asked ourselves this question around about this time last year. We'd been running things called masterclasses for some time. They were just seminars. Let's tell people a bunch of stuff that we guess they might like to know. We found that attendance was variable because anybody who'd been to a previous presentation thought, oh, well, I don't really need to go to the next one. I'm not going to get anything new from it. Well, we looked up the dictionary definition of a masterclass, a class taught by someone who has an expert knowledge or skill in a particular area, especially in music. Well, I'm not very musical, I'm afraid to say. But hopefully we can take some lessons from the broader context. Is anybody in the audience musical? Anybody play a musical instrument? Yeah. Does anybody in the audience like music? Okay. That's a slightly more inclusive question. Good. Does anybody want to shout out their favorite artist, pop star, guitarist, singer, composer? Suggestions? Sinatra. Very good. So if you had a time machine and an opportunity to go back and have a masterclass with Frank Sinatra, what might you expect it to look like? Would you expect him to just turn up and tell you what he thought you wanted to know? Would you expect him to try and figure out whether or not you were a singer? How much of his material did you know? Were you just a listener or a fan, or were you somebody that wanted to learn from the master? There needs to be some degree of interaction. I think that a masterclass should be a number of things. It should evolve relatively organically. It should be interactive. It should deliver an enhanced understanding of the subject matter and the expertise. Let you get inside Frank Sinatra's head a little bit rather than just hear what he wanted to tell you. Ideally, it should be face-to-face. One of the challenges in this day and age is, why should any of you fly to Bahrain when you could just download the video that this young man at the front is recording? Well, in a masterclass context, just perhaps you should fly to Bahrain, because then you get to ask a question and make the content of the masterclass actually adapt to the people that are in the room. It's a different quality and focus. Hopefully, everybody in the room will learn something. I'm going to ask the question I asked at the beginning again, because we've had a lot more people come in. How many people in the room have been to one of my masterclasses before? Okay, so there's a couple more hands going up, but that's good. That means I can repeat last year's, no problem. It should not be easily repeated. We're going to go through an exercise in a moment to figure out who's in the room and what you want to know. And this is a different group of people to the last one that I ran. So we're going to get different questions, different things are going to flow out, and we're going to have a different amount of time to focus on those things. So what I'd like to do first is just to get an understanding of who's in the room. So today's audience, hands up if you are not a representative of a university. Right, okay, so we've got 2 hands going up in the room. So I think we can say primarily universities. Sometimes it's different. Sometimes we get ministry people in or employers in, maybe the occasional student in. I imagine the people in the red shirts are principally students, am I right? And really engaged with the content. Okay, who is not from the Middle East? Okay, so we've got an international audience, but mainly from the region. Can I have a show of hands for any rectors, vice-chancellors, institutional leaders that we've managed to convince to be in the room? Okay, so we've got a few institutional leaders, that's great. How about anybody in an international office? Okay, not too many. So how about sort of planning, strategy? Okay. Institutional research, we got any of those? A few. International again. How many actual active teachers do we have in the room? Who teaches students? Great. Researchers. Any researchers in the room? Similar number. How many that do both teaching and research? Good. Okay, so that gives us a bit of a sense. We might take a little bit of a regional focus, but there's quite a diverse range of sort of job responsibilities in the room, so hopefully we'll get some diverse questions in terms of which direction we're going to take the presentation in. So that's the next part, and the most important part of the session is, what do you want to know? Now, if you're really quiet and not prepared to stand up, can we use the mics and get them? Yeah, the mics out. So I need to know what you'd like to know from us. Essentially, how this is going to work is I'm going to take a Q&A. I'm going to take the questions down on the screen, and then we're going to hear from my colleagues. and have a little bit of coffee break. And whilst that's all happening, I'll be pulling together interactive answers, and I'll come back after the coffee break and try and answer as many of your concerns in depth and detail as we have time for. Okay? So if you don't ask me any questions, the upside is that you're going to get to leave a lot earlier, but you're perhaps going to leave with a lot less information. Okay, so a show of hands, and there are people in the room with mics that'll come and take your questions. I'll note them down on screen, try and group them together as we're going, and we'll see where it takes us. So hands up, anybody who's got a question about rankings. Subject rankings have just come out, so maybe that's a topic, but it can be anything that QS does around the rankings and ratings space, not even anything that QS does. If you want to ask questions about Times Higher Education, Shanghai, how many rankings there are in the world, which ones should matter, which ones you should follow, all of that's fair game. So hopefully the fact that you're in the room means that you have got some curiosity. So can I see any hands for questions, dimensions, things that you'd like explained?
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Professor Randa Hamade, Arabian Gulf University. We know about the QS ranking, but we would like to know further from you. How did QS now overtake the other rankings? You know, what made it so popular compared to the others? So what advantage does QS have in comparison with the other rankings? That's question number one. And the second question is, does QS follow a systematic approach, or does it change, you know, after every ranking? Does it change their criteria, or is it standard?
That's technology letting me down. Okay, and then systematic approach. Vary between rankings. Okay, next question. Yeah, we've not got too much time to take the questions, so let's look if we can hurry up.
Very quickly. I'm from a standalone business school, so I'm interested to any rankings that are specific to business schools. And as a reverse, I'm not interested by the one concerning universities, because we cannot be in these ones.
Yeah, keep going. Keep your hands up, and then they can be coming to you whilst I'm writing down.
Yeah, thanks. Devinder Sandhu from RCSI here in Bahrain. It's a simple question to answer, but I suspect it's going to be very complex. It's about how universities improve their rankings. So in your experience of following universities over time, what sort of things and trends have you noticed? Has it been about investment in research? Has it been just about faculty? It's about student numbers, the citations, and all those parameters. But really, how do you make the whole thing work and create energy, and that you're driving it? You make people conscious of the fact that the rankings are important in this world, and students will look at that and at your performance. So I'm sorry about the simple question, but I suspect the complexity will be quite interesting to hear about.
Very good.
Yes, my name is Ahmed Majdouba. I'm from the University of Jordan. I'm interested to hear from you as to how QS ranking improves performance. A lot of people focus on how QS measures performance. It's about how it improves performance. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Yes, I'm Nada Mughayzil from Lebanon. The impact of your ranking is very important for the reputation of a university, but we see that the question of teaching and learning and their outcomes are not taken enough into consideration. It's all about reputation or research. So do you plan something for that?
I'm Professor Zakarna, Dean of Scientific Research at Mota University in Jordan. Now, I'm working on the QS file for the first time this year, and I came across some questions when, filling the application regarding the statistics, etc. My question is technical, though. Sometimes you send a message inquiring about something, and all you get is just you receive a ticket and its number. And they don't reply immediately. What I suggest is, why don't QS add a hotline so you can communicate directly with them to save time and effort, especially if you are approaching deadlines and so on. So that's my suggestion, is to add a hotline so people can reply about questions and so on. Thank you.
My name is Fawzi Dwekat, the Manager of Educational Effectiveness at Zayed University. As part of your approach research, as all we know, and we saw the logo of Scopus, my question is, what does make Scopus a unique indicator rather than others? And here, what about those faculty members who can publish in other languages than English? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ammar Al-Hawaj. I'm the Director of International Relations at Ahliya University. So my question is related to one of the questions asked previously. What initiatives or plans are there in place to further incorporate teaching and learning effectiveness? We see in the UK they have the Teaching Excellence Framework. Currently, the QS ranking looks at some minor criteria in relation to faculty to student ratio, etc. So what plans are there in place to further incorporate this element?
Okay, 2 more questions, and then we're going to have to move along. There's one at the front, and 3 questions actually. Okay. One there, and then one there. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I'm Tirtha from Binus University in Jakarta. For the young university, is there any way to collaborate between the more mature university in terms of ranking, particularly in the research area? Because research-related areas and citation is comprises of 20% at least for your ranking. So we know that many universities competing each other here, but is there any way that QS can facilitate younger university to collaborate? Thank you.
Okay, there's one here, and then there's one at the back there.
I am Gauragovinda Goswami, a Professor of Economics and Treasurer, North-South University, Dhaka, Bangladesh. So my question is there any link between accreditation and QS ranking? And the second question is QS ranking cost-free? Thank you.
I might answer that question right now. Yes, it is. We can go into detail. I mean, obviously, improved performance is not without cost. I mean, that's on your side, but there is no cost of participation in any of the QS rankings. There's one question there in this aisle towards the back. Yep, that hand. And that'll be the last. Okay, whilst we're waiting.
Okay, William Tounsi from University of Business and Technology in Saudi Arabia. I'm expecting to go more of the how rather than the what. So I've attended a couple of sessions of QS and more into what is the model and what are the percentages for each category. I'm more interested to know about the how and the details of how can universities get rising, and especially getting to know institutions who already did it in terms of getting to the rising on the rankings, how they did it, and to showcase success and share what works for universities, so it can be a learning for others. Thank you.
Okay, last question.
Yeah, would you, it's Dr. Mohammed Nur Nabi. I'm from Prince Sultan University in Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, some of the universities are very local. So we cannot get any international students. So in that case, how would you conduct the survey on academic reputation and this? And it's very complex for us to understand. And secondly, the size does matter. So how would you normalize the size in terms of ranking? Thank you.
Okay, I think I've got everything I'm going to need to answer some of those questions. We may not get into full detail. And the video that's showing is your next opportunity to get more answers when we don't manage to answer necessarily every question in depth. I mean, I'll be here for the rest of the conference, but if you're interested in getting into more detail, particularly about how data influences rankings, then the EduData Summit will be running in June, and this year I am pleased to announce that it is taking place on MIT's campus. So you can come and join us on the campus of the world's leading university to try and learn from them and from a variety of other speakers that will be in place to talk about how they're using data to diagnose and develop diagnose performance and develop strategy. So that's pretty much all I've got time for in this session. I'll be back on after the coffee break to try and address some of those very good questions that you've raised.